My parents tried to steal my inheritance. For my sister, my grandma's secret plan saved me. I've spent my whole life feeling like I was on the outside looking in, even in my own family, and it all came to a head in a way I never saw coming. I'm Jake, a 28-year-old from a quiet suburb in Minnesota, and I've always been the other kid in my parents' eyes, overshadowed by my younger sister Elise. Growing up, I learned early on that no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be the favorite. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but after nearly 3 decades, I thought I'd made peace with Itun till my grandfather's death turned everything upside down. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. It's a crisp November morning, the kind where the air smells like frost and fallen leaves, and I'm sitting in my childhood home for the reading of my Grandpa Henry's will. The living room is exactly as I remember it. The faded floral couch with a crocheted blanket draped over the arm, the old wooden coffee table scratched from years of use, and the faint scent of my mom's lavender potpourri lingering in the air. A fire crackles in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room, but the atmosphere is anything but cozy. There's a tension in the air, a heaviness that's been building for years. My family is gathered around, each of us perched on chairs or the couch, waiting for the lawyer to start. My mom, Linda, a 52-year-old real estate agent with a tight smile and a penchant for perfection, is fussing with a tray of coffee and cookies she set out earlier. She's wearing her usual pearl earrings, the ones she always puts on for important occasions, and keeps smoothing her skirt like she's nervous. My dad, Tom, a 55-year-old high school math teacher with a permanent frown etched into his face, is sitting in his favorite armchair, scrolling through his phone and muttering about how he has papers to grade. Elise, my 25-year-old sister, is next to him, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, her manicured nails tapping on her phone as she texts someone, probably her new boyfriend Chad, who she's been gushing about for weeks. She's wearing a designer sweater that probably cost more than my rent, a gift from Mom and Dad, of course. Then there's my grandma Margaret, my Grandpa Henry's widow. She's 78, with silver hair tied into a loose bun, and a quiet strength that's always made her my favorite person in the family. She's sitting in a rocking chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, a small smile on her face as she watches us all. She's the only one who doesn't seem tense, and I can't help but wonder what she's thinking. My Aunt Susan, Mom's younger sister, a 48-year-old yoga instructor with a bohemian vibe, is here too, sipping her coffee and chatting softly with her 16-year-old daughter Mia, who's more interested in her earbuds than the family drama about to unfold. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a balding man in his 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, clears his throat and begins reading the will. Grandpa Henry passed away 2 months ago, and while we all knew he'd left something for the grandkids, I wasn't prepared for the numbers. To my grandchildren, Jake, Elise, and me, I leave an equal share of my estate, totaling $1,200,000 to be divided as follows. $400,000 each, Mr. Peterson says, his voice steady. I blink, my heart skipping a beat. $400,000. That kind of money could change my life, pay off my student loans. Let me finally move out of my tiny apartment, maybe even start the small business I've always dreamed of. But before I can even process it, Mom speaks up, her voice sharp. That can't be right, she says, setting her coffee cup down with a clink. Dad must have made a mistake. Elise needs that money more. She's starting a new life with Chad, and they're planning to buy a house. I feel my stomach drop. Of course, this is how it's always been. Elise gets everything, and I get nothing. I glance at Elise, expecting her to look smug, but she's staring at her phone, her expression unreadable. Dad nods in agreement with Mom, his frown deepening. Jake's fine, he says, not even looking at me. He's got a good job. He doesn't need it. I clench my fists, my nails digging into my palms. A good job? I work 50 hours a week as a data analyst, barely making ends meet, while Elise flits from one hobby to the next, always funded by Mom and Dad. I think back to all the times I was overlooked growing up, how Elise got a brand new car for her 16th birthday while I got a pat on the back for getting straight A's, how they paid for her to study abroad in Paris while I worked 2 jobs to afford community college before transferring to my dream school on a scholarship. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm worth their attention, and I'm still invisible. Grandma Margaret shifts in her rocking chair, her eyes narrowing as she looks at Mom. Henry was very clear about his wishes, Linda, she says, her voice calm but firm. He wanted the kids to have equal shares. That's what he wrote, and that's what's happening. Mom opens her mouth to argue, but Mr. Peterson cuts her off. Moving on to the next part of the will. I sit there, my mind racing, a mix of hope and dread settling in my chest. 400,000 is mine, but I have a feeling this isn't over. The days after the will reading were a whirlwind of emotions. I left my parents' house that morning with a check for 400,000 in my pocket, my hands trembling as I tucked it into my wallet. I drove back to my apartment in silence, the weight of the money and my parents' reaction pressing down on me. My place is a small 1-bedroom in a rundown building on the edge of town. The kind of place where the heat only works half the time and the walls are so thin I can hear my neighbor's TV through them. But as I sat on my lumpy couch, staring at the check, I let myself dream for the first time in years. I could pay off my $60,000 in student loans, move to a better place, maybe even take a real vacation, something I haven't done since I was a kid. But that dream didn't last long. 2 days later, I got a call from Mom. I was in the middle of making dinner boxed mac and cheese, because it's cheap and I'm trying to save every penny when my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, the steam from the pot making my tiny kitchen feel even smaller, and picked up. "Jake, we need to talk," Mom said. Her voice clipped, the way it always gets when she's about to lecture me. "Your father and I have been thinking, and we've decided it's best if you give your inheritance to Elise." I froze, the spoon I'd been holding slipping from my hand and clattering onto the counter. "What?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom sighed, like I was being difficult. "Elise needs the money more, Jake. She and Chad are trying to buy a house, and they're talking about starting a family soon. You're doing fine, you've always been so independent. We know Grandpa would have wanted this." I could hear Dad in the background, muttering something about how I don't need that kind of money, and it felt like a punch to the gut. Independent? I've had to be, because they never gave me a choice. "Mom, that's not fair," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. "Grandpa wanted us to have equal shares. He said so in the will. This money, it could change my life too." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Mom's tone turned cold. "We're your parents, Jake. We know what's best. If you don't give it to Elise, we'll find a way to make sure she gets it. We're not asking." And then she hung up, leaving me standing in my kitchen, the mac and cheese bubbling over on the stove, the smell of burnt cheese filling the air. I turned off the burner and sank onto the floor, my back against the cabinets, my head in my hands. I felt betrayed, but not surprised. This was just another chapter in a story I'd been living my whole life. I thought back to all the times they'd favored Eliso. They threw her a huge Sweet 16 party with a live band while I got a store-bought cake and a 20 gift card. How they paid for her to go to a fancy art school, even though she dropped out after a year, while I had to beg for help with my tuition. I'd always told myself I was okay with it, that I didn't need their approval, but this was too much. I knew I couldn't let them take the money. It wasn't just about the 400,000, it was about standing up for myself, for once in my life. But I also knew I couldn't fight them alone. So I called the one person I knew I could trust, Grandma Margaret. I drove to her house the next day, a small bungalow on the outskirts of town with a wraparound porch and a garden full of late-blooming chrysanthemums. She greeted me with a warm hug, the scent of her rosewater perfume wrapping around me like a comfort blanket. "Come in, sweetheart," she said, leading me to her kitchen, where a pot of chamomile tea was already brewing on the stove. We sat at her little round table, the one with the chipped edge from when I accidentally dropped a plate as a kid, and I told her everything Mom's call, their plan to give my money to Elise, The way they dismissed me like I didn't matter. Grandma listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her teacup, her eyes soft but sharp. When I finished, she set her cup down with a soft clink and looked at me, a small smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Jake," she said, her voice steady. "Your parents tried the same thing with your grandfather years ago. They wanted him to leave everything to Ellis' Sage. She was more delicate, that she needed the support. But Henry wouldn't hear of it. He insisted on equal shares for all of you, and he made sure it was ironclad." I stared at her, my heart pounding. They tried to change his will?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma nodded, her smile turning a little mischievous. "They did. But your grandfather was smarter than they gave him credit for. And so am I." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a 78-year-old. "Don't you worry, Jake. We're going to make sure you get what's yours." Grandma's words gave me a spark of hope, but the next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. My parents didn't let up. They called me almost every day, their tone growing more insistent, more manipulative. "Jake, think about your sister," Mom would say, her voice dripping with fake concern. "She's starting a new chapter. Don't you want her to have a good life?" Dad was less subtle, his messages blunt and cold. "You're being selfish, Jake," he said in one voicemail, his voice hard. "We raised you better than this." I stopped answering their calls, letting them go to voicemail, but each message felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the drama. My cubicle at the office was a small, gray space with a flickering fluorescent light and a view of the parking lot. But it was a refuge. I'd sit there crunching numbers for hours, the hum of the office around me phones ringing, co-workers chatting about their weekend plans, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my mind kept drifting back to my parents, to Elise, to the money that was supposed to be mine. I felt like I was fighting a losing battle, like they'd find a way to take it from me no matter what I did. But Grandma Margaret wasn't about to let that happen. She called me one evening, just as I was getting home from work, my tie loosened and my shirt wrinkled from a long day. "Jake, I've spoken to Susan," she said, her voice bright with determination. "She's on your side, and so is Mia. We're going to fight this together." Aunt Susan, my mom's younger sister, had always been the black sheep of the family, free-spirited, outspoken, the kind of person who'd show up to Thanksgiving in a tie-dye dress and flip-flops. She'd never gotten along with Mom, and I wasn't surprised she was willing to help me. The four of us, May, Grandma, Aunt Susan, and Mia met at Grandma's house the next weekend to come up with a plan. It was a Saturday afternoon, the sky overcast with the promise of snow, and Grandma's kitchen was warm with the smell of freshly baked apple pie. Mia, a lanky 16-year-old with braces and a shy smile, helped Grandma set the table, her earbuds dangling around her neck as she hummed a tune I didn't recognize. Aunt Susan sat across from me, her long braids swinging as she leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Your parents are out of line, Jake," she said, her voice low but firm. "They've always played favorites. But this is theft. We're not letting them get away with it." Grandma had already contacted Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who'd read the will, and he confirmed what she told me. Grandpa Henry's will was airtight. There was no way my parents could legally take my share, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try. "Your mom's been calling me too," Grandma said, slicing the pie with a steady hand. "She thinks she can guilt me into changing my mind, but I told her the same thing I told her years ago. Henry wanted equality, and that's what he's getting." She handed me a slice of pie, the crust golden and flaky, the apples spiced with cinnamon, and I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the food. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. With Grandma, Aunt Susan, and Mia by my side, I found the strength to stand my ground. We hired a lawyer of our own, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Carter, who specialized in estate disputes. She met with us at Grandma's house, her briefcase stuffed with papers and laid out our options. "Your parents don't have a legal leg to stand on," she said, adjusting her glasses. "But they might try to pressure you into signing over the money. Don't let them. We'll make sure your inheritance stays yours." I nodded, my throat tight with gratitude. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real family fighting for Minot against me. In the end, my parents didn't get their way. With Miss Carter's help, we made sure my $400,000 stayed mine. My parents tried everything: guilt trips, threats, even showing up at my apartment unannounced one evening, their faces a mix of anger and desperation. "Jake, you're tearing this family apart," Mom said, her voice trembling as she stood in my doorway, her coat still on. Dad just glared at me, his arms crossed. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his tone icy. But I held firm, my hands steady as I told them to leave. "This is my money," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Grandpa wanted me to have it, and I'm keeping it." They left without another word, the sound of their car pulling away echoing in the quiet night. The fallout was messy. My relationship with my parents became more strained than ever. Mom eventually started to soften. She called me a few weeks later, her voice hesitant, and admitted she'd been wrong to favor Elise so much. "I didn't realize how much it hurt you, Jake," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I appreciated the apology, but it didn't erase years of neglect. Dad, on the other hand, doubled down. "You're ungrateful," he told me at a tense family dinner at Grandma's, his fork clattering against his plate. "We gave you everything." I didn't bother arguing. I just left the table, my plate of roast chicken untouched, and went to sit on the porch with Mia, who gave me a small, understanding smile. Elise surprised me the most. A month after the whole ordeal, she showed up at my apartment, her eyes red from crying. She looked different: no designer clothes, no perfect makeup, just a plain sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "I'm sorry, Jake," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't realize how much Mom and Dad's favoritism hurt you. I took it for granted, and I shouldn't have." She told me she'd broken up with Chad. He'd been pushing her to pressure me for the money, and she realized he didn't care about her, just her bank account. "I'm trying to change," she said, wiping her eyes. "I got a joba reel one at a coffee shop. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. I didn't forgive her right away, I couldn't, but I told her I appreciated her trying. It was a start. With my inheritance secure, I started to rebuild my life. I paid off my student loans, the weight of that debt lifting off my shoulders like a physical burden. I moved into a new apartment, a small but cozy place with big windows and a view of the park, where I could hear birds chirping in the morning instead of my neighbor's TV. I invested some of the money, setting myself up for the future, and put a chunk aside to start a small charity project, a mentorship program for kids from low-income families, something I'd always wanted to do. It felt good to give back, to turn my pain into something positive. The best part, though, was my relationship with Grandma Margaret. We grew closer than ever, spending Sunday afternoons together at her house, sipping tea and talking about everything from Grandpa Henry's old fishing stories to my plans for the future. Aunt Susan and Mia became my rocks too. Susan would drag me to her yoga classes, laughing when I couldn't touch my toes, and Mia started calling me her cool cousin, which made me smile more than I thought it would. For the first time, I felt like I had a family that truly saw me, that valued me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. But even as I moved forward, the scars of my childhood lingered. I'd spent so long feeling invisible, so long trying to prove my worth, that I sometimes caught myself wondering if I'd ever truly heal. I wondered if my parents would ever see me as more than the other kid, if Elise's change of heart would last, if I'd ever be able to let go of the resentment that had built up over the years. It's a work in progress, but I'm trying every day. I'm trying.